Chapter 1. Dzedo's House. The undeniably unique smell of oncoming rain is neither offensive nor aromatic. A blackened sky can, however, foretell the worst. A single heavy raindrop hit my face like an insult. I pumped the bicycle pedals hard against the heavy wind. It was apparent that refuge at my grandfather Dzedo's farmhouse was my only option. His home was next door, and anyways, it was a convenient place to wait out the storm. Coming to a graveled, skidding stop, I dropped my bicycle next to the door. Like a normal 9-year-old, stomping wet feet led directly to the basement, where I found Dzedo, reposed on his Chesterfield, diligently smoking his filterless export A's. Pelting rain lashed against the window as I plopped next to him. Nearly motionless tobacco smoke surrounded Dzedo like a phantom, and in stark contrast to the maelstrom outside. He puffed a glowing cigarette while sitting contemplatively on his ancient couch. We sat across from an old rounded refrigerator that sported a chrome ornament on the middle of the door. It looked like it belonged on the hood of Dzedo's burgundy and white 1956 Pontiac Strato Chief. The rain was now in full force. As we sat on the old Chesterfield, both mute, we gazed up at the basement window to see a roaring water world. The howling wind carried broken tree branches past us like radio static. Outside was no longer an environment fit for humans, all manner of life now cowering from an unyielding wet force. I observed rivulets of water form and collect to breach the warm, summer-plastered basement wall. "Hi, Dzedo. I came to see you," I said. "Oh, I think maybe you're here because you didn't want to get wet," said Dzedo. "Is there a tornado outside? Can I eat an apple? Tell me a story, Dzedo," I begged. "Were you a boxer?" I asked. "Did you fight like those guys on TV?" "No tornado, Georgie, and yes, have an apple. I'll tell you a story," he replied. "I had to do something, you know. There was no money in those days. It was called the Great Depression, you know. No work for nobody. Not like now. Your father, he works and makes good money at Chrysler's. It was not so good when I came from the old country to Canada. And if I lost the fight, I got no money, just broken bones. Look at these old hands. See how they are?" he said. Dzedo displayed his wrinkled farm hands that sported 2 missing fingers. They told of a silent story of a life with hardships, farm laboring. "Do they hurt?" I asked. "No fancy doctors back then either. Not like now. You know, if you broke a bone, it stayed that way. If you got sick, then—" "What do you say, Georgie?" Dzedo asked. Although now rooted in Canada for 26 years, he spoke with a heavy Slovak accent. Maidstone was Dzedo's adopted community and a place where he found friends and neighbors with a Slovak diaspora in Windsor. His weathered face was festooned with an exceptionally large nose and gray-blue eyes radiating warmth, and a long life filled with adventure, knowledge, and happiness. But also mixed in was a hint of sadness that always permeated his countless stories. To acquire the wisdom my grandfather possessed seemed insurmountable. He spoke with labored breath and quick breathing. Even at rest, he never seemed to garner enough oxygen. His lungs emanated a disquieting, gurgling sound. Even as a child, I surmised that his many years of smoking had taken its toll. In spite of his ongoing coughing fits, and as counterintuitive as it was to me, he was compelled to light yet another smoke. The basement window emanated a failing light that mingled with phantom vapors of blue tobacco smoke. Dzedo appeared to fade and looked frozen like some theater tableau. That scene etched into my memory, and even then I knew he was slowly receding from my life and into a past. It occurred to me that I would only see Dzedo again in dreams and memories. Years later, the hidden layers within his stories would reveal themselves. Dzedo was a good storyteller. Without coaxing, he could regale me along with a tin of Brunswick sardines directly from the tin. This also became our routine. It also involved concocting a special tea where Dzedo would combine equal parts tea and milk with lots of sugar. It was during one such occasion that he spoke of adventures riding rail cars west to go work in the fruit orchards of California. On one occasion, when it was nearly winter and cold, he told us when he jumped onto a train that had slowed near a crossing. He said that for many hours he clung for his life holding metal on the outside of a rolling boxcar. He was caught by a railroad man who then called the police to have him arrested. He could not release his nearly frozen grip, and an arriving police officer had to assist in prying off his hands. The officer took Dzedo to the police station where, in earnest, provided him a warm coffee and something to eat. The officer proceeded to send him on his way without consequences. Dzedo wistfully said that he never forgot that act of kindness. Other stories chronicled homeland adventures in Czechoslovakia from his youth. I am sure he played a little fast and loose with the truth, but even so, it made his stories dramatic. He once told of a ghost story that happened when he was a schoolboy. I don't think he anticipated the terrifying effect that story had on me. He spoke with a blend of Slovak and English as I listened with rapt attention. It went something like this. It was late fall, cold and getting dark. I had lost track of time while playing at my schoolmate's house at the other end of our village. I knew I'd be in trouble when I got home, and I left in haste. To save time, I gambled on a shortcut that I knew led across a path through the woods, down a hill, and across a creek. It had rained hard that day before, and I could hear the water rushing. By now it was completely dark, with a stinging wind blowing a damp drizzle. Entering the forested area and down a barely visible path, I was met with a strange sound emanating all around. Trees groaned in the wind. Leaves tumbled by me that sounded like footsteps. Half running now, I clambered downhill, falling once, scraping my hands. The path was diminishing, and my memory of the proper direction was compromised by other little paths that I didn't remember seeing before. Listening to the sound of the water, I finally made my way to the disused wooden bridge. It was the shortest route, and it traversed a wide, shallow creek. The flowing water rumbled. I took short, halting steps onto the weathered boards and inched forward. Many of the supporting boards were rotten, and most were missing. I had to step over open spaces. The bridge was now illuminated intermittently, while the parting clouds provided a full moon. This also revealed that I was now at an uncomfortable height, high over the water, and my hands froze to the railing, and my legs refused to proceed. As I paused, an unusually weird type of fog swirled below and around the bridge. With halting steps, I inched forward. The old structure protested with groans and creaks. The path across looked like an old piano with missing keys. Dappled moonlight pierced feeble light through the trees, illuminating only a patchwork of footholds. About halfways, the mistiness increased and seemed to rise higher, consuming and obscuring any recognizable forward passage. While trying to adjust my vision, something unrecognizable began materializing in front of me. My way was blocked. I stood frozen and stared with fright. The fog slowly twisted and turned, then began forming into a ghastly apparition. It looked like a person's face that morphed into an animal. I stared frozen at the otherworldly obstacle directly in front of me. Was it a person? I could see completely through it, and then began to float above the bridge and grow larger and larger. I turned in fright and ran as fast as my feet would move me back to the opposite direction. I was now forced to take the long way home by wading through a shallow flowing stream. I arrived home caked in mud and a torn coat, bloodied and bruised. I was a mess and was, of course, scolded, spanked, and told not to make up stories. Tales from my grandfather were sometimes frightening, but always entertaining. His subjects varied widely. He told of war stories while showing his leg bullet wound, to stories from his grandfather, who was born in the early 1800s. He spoke of witches, sea monsters, and heroes. Dzedo changed the subject if my questions delved into a past too difficult to account. I know that sometimes my inquiries touched nerves and some memories were best left buried. The storm's ferocity diminished, and we decided to go upstairs for a different view. I bounded up the steps while Dzedo followed laboriously. We made our way across the second floor to a screened-in front porch. In front of us, car tires hissed across wet road as Dzedo lit another cigarette, just as the telephone rang, making him return again into the house. I had a panoramic view of the soaked farm fields across busy number 3 highway. Dzedo returned and said, "Your mother called and was worried where you were." "Can I stay for a little longer, Dzedo, please?" We both sat in silence while watching the last of the storm recede. Large puddles lay everywhere. The ditch was breaching with flowing brown clay water. I could see the lawn peppered with debris. Apples and pears dislodged from the orchard trees and lay strewn. I instinctively knew that cutting the grass was going to be my next farm chore. Grass cutting was a favorite time for me because the task was usually shared with my cousin and best friend Stevie. He was a couple years older, and I cherished every moment of his company. Putting the phone down, Dzedo announced that Uncle Steve and Cousin Stevie would be visiting first thing tomorrow morning. The storm had now abated, revealing raking beams of light across our vista. A warm, late afternoon sun was welcoming. The sweet smell of post-rain storm permeated the farm. Dzedo and I gazed at the now benevolent sky with a sinking sun. We sat quietly. The silence was broken when Mum called my name from a distance. Bubba, grandmother, appeared at the door now. "Time to go home now, Georgie. Your supper is on the table."